On the morning of June 19, 2025, Israel awoke not to sunrise, but to the blare of air raid sirens. The city of Tel Aviv, usually bustling with early commuters and the hum of daily life, was instead gripped by a sudden, chilling fear. People scrambled for safety, their routines shattered in an instant as the reality of war arrived at their doorstep. The roar of explosions echoed across the city, lighting up the sky and sending shockwaves through the hearts of millions. The night was pierced by flashes and thunder, as neighborhoods that had never seen conflict were suddenly thrust into chaos. Iran had launched its largest ever missile attack, targeting major cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa in a direct, full-scale assault. This was not a limited strike or a warning shot. It was a calculated, coordinated offensive designed to overwhelm Israel's defenses and send a clear message to the world. The skies filled with missile trails and thunderous detonations, shattering the illusion of safety for millions. The relentless barrage left no doubt. This was a moment that would redefine the region's security landscape. Israel's Home Front Command urgently ordered citizens to seek shelter as the barrage struck civilian centers. Families huddled in bomb shelters, clutching loved ones and phones, waiting for updates and hoping for survival as the attacks continued. The attack exposed the limits of Israel's famed Iron Dome, with several missiles breaching defenses and causing devastation. Buildings were damaged, streets littered with debris, and the sense of invulnerability that many Israelis felt was shattered in a matter of minutes. The psychological shock was immediate but quickly hardened into resolve. This was no proxy war but open state-on-state conflict. The fear and confusion soon gave way to determination, as Israelis realized the gravity of the situation and the need to stand united. The sheer scale and coordination of the attack signaled a new era of confrontation between Iran and Israel. Analysts around the world scrambled to make sense of the unprecedented escalation, while the region braced for what might come next. International leaders called for restraint, but the shockwaves of the attack were felt far beyond Israel's borders, raising fears of a wider conflict that could engulf the Middle East and draw in global powers. As the world watched, Israel prepared to respond, knowing the consequences would ripple far beyond the region. The dawn of June 19th marked not just a new day but a turning point in the history of the Middle East. Just after 7 a.m., Iran unleashed dozens of Sajal 2 ballistic missiles from deep within its territory in a meticulously coordinated attack. The launches were timed to maximize surprise, catching Israeli defenses at a vulnerable moment. The roar of engines and the fiery trails of the missiles lit up the early morning sky, signaling the start of a new and dangerous phase in the conflict. The skies over central Israel became a battleground, as interceptors raced to meet the incoming threat. Iron Dome batteries and other air defense systems fired in rapid succession, their contrails weaving a desperate web above the city. Residents watched in fear and awe as the battle played out overhead, the sounds of explosions and sirens filling the air. The sheer volume of missiles overwhelmed even the most advanced defenses. Several warheads broke through, striking residential areas, including Ramat Gan and South Tel Aviv. The impact was devastating. Windows shattered, buildings crumbled, and entire neighborhoods were left in chaos. Buildings were shredded, cars destroyed, and emergency crews scrambled to rescue the trapped and wounded. First responders worked tirelessly amid the rubble, searching for survivors and providing urgent medical care to the injured, while the threat of further attacks loomed overhead. The attacks were precise, targeting Israel's most populous and vital economic centers. The financial district, government buildings, and densely packed neighborhoods all suffered damage, underscoring the strategic intent behind the barrage. Iran's use of advanced, hard-to-intercept missiles sent a clear message about its military capabilities. The debris left behind revealed sophisticated technology, raising concerns among military analysts about the evolving threat and the need for improved defenses. The breach of Israel's air defenses was a strategic and psychological blow, forcing a rapid reassessment of the conflict. Military leaders convened emergency meetings, grappling with the reality that their shield had been pierced in a way few had anticipated. Explosions echoed across the country from Beersheba to the northern coast, as sirens wailed and civilians huddled in shelters. The sense of vulnerability was palpable, with families clinging to one another as the night was punctuated by distant booms and flashes of light. For many, it was a morning of terror and uncertainty, with no end in sight. The attack left a deep psychological scar, as Israelis faced the sobering reality of a new era in warfare, one where the home front was now the front line. Israel's response was swift and resolute. Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed Iran would pay a heavy price, promising a major retaliatory campaign. Defense Minister Katz ordered intensified strikes on Iranian strategic and government targets, escalating the conflict. Within hours, Israeli jets struck the Arak heavy water nuclear reactor and a weapons site in Natanz, aiming to cripple Iran's nuclear ambitions. Factories producing missile components were also hit, targeting the heart of Iran's offensive capabilities. President Herzog condemned the Iranian attack, framing Israel's retaliation as both necessary and justified. The world watched as the conflict spiraled, with both sides targeting sensitive sites and raising the stakes of war. The missile strikes left devastation and suffering across Israel, transforming once bustling neighborhoods into scenes of chaos and heartbreak. The suddenness of the attacks caught many off guard, shattering the sense of normalcy that families had worked so hard to maintain. In Beersheba, Soroka Medical Center was hit, forcing it to close to all but life-threatening emergencies. The hospital, a lifeline for the region, struggled to cope as staff worked tirelessly to treat the wounded, even as their own facility was under threat. At least 65 people were injured nationwide, including elderly civilians and those hurt while fleeing to shelters. Many were caught in the open, scrambling for safety as sirens blared, while others suffered injuries from flying debris and collapsing structures. Tel Aviv saw multiple casualties, with hospitals strained by the sudden influx of wounded. Emergency rooms overflowed, and medical teams worked around the clock, improvising to save lives amid the chaos. Residential neighborhoods in Ramat Gan were left in ruins, families displaced, and streets littered with debris. The destruction forced many to abandon their homes, unsure when or if they would be able to return. The psychological scars ran deep as the sense of safety was shattered for millions. Children and adults alike struggled with fear and uncertainty, seeking comfort in shelters and from one another. Despite the trauma, Israeli society rallied, with public morale bolstered by resilience and defiance. Communities came together, determined not to let fear dictate their lives. Volunteers mobilized to support the injured and homeless, even as the threat of further attacks loomed. Aid organizations and ordinary citizens alike provided food, shelter and comfort to those in need, embodying the spirit of solidarity. The attack was a brutal reminder of the vulnerability of daily life in a region accustomed to conflict. Playgrounds stood empty, businesses shuttered, and the routines of daily existence were upended in an instant. Beneath the surface, the trauma of war left lasting wounds on a nation forced to endure yet another crisis. For many, the path to healing would be long, as the memories of loss and survival became part of their daily reality. In Tehran, officials framed the attack as a calculated military operation, not an assault on civilians. Iran claimed its primary target near Soroka Medical Center was an IDF tech park, justifying the strike as legitimate. Iranian leaders issued stern warnings to the US, threatening severe consequences for any intervention. Supreme Leader Khamenei declared that American involvement would bring irreparable damage to US interests. Iran imposed nationwide internet restrictions to control the narrative and prevent panic. The government portrayed its actions as a necessary response to Israeli aggression, aiming to project strength at home and abroad. This blend of military action, defiant rhetoric, and information control defined Iran's strategy in the escalating conflict. Israeli airstrikes brought the war to Iran's cities, with explosions and sirens haunting Tehran's nights. The strikes targeted military and strategic sites near urban centers, spreading fear among civilians. Human rights groups reported hundreds killed and over 1,000 injured, including many civilians. Iran's official casualty figures were lower, but independent monitors warned the toll was rising. The attack on the Arak nuclear facility raised fears of nuclear disaster, though no radiation leaks were reported. Foreign nationals, including Indian pilgrims, were stranded in Iran, desperate for evacuation as airports closed. The conflict's human cost extended far beyond the battlefield, trapping innocents in a rapidly worsening crisis. The war's reach was global, complicating the international response and deepening the humanitarian emergency. The world reacted with alarm as the conflict escalated. President Trump expressed concern but hesitated to commit U.S. forces, focusing on evacuating embassy staff. The UK called for emergency nuclear talks, but legal doubts over Israel's strikes complicated support. Israel's ambassador to the US insisted on eliminating Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities, signaling a long campaign. Military analysts warned that targeting Iran's buried nuclear sites could require US bunker busters, raising the risk of wider war. The UN Security Council convened, but divisions made a resolution unlikely. The world now faced the urgent task of preventing a catastrophic regional conflict. For Israelis, the missile attack shattered daily life. Families rushed to shelters, schools closed, and cities fell silent. The psychological toll was immense, especially for children and the elderly. In Iran, Israeli strikes brought war to the home front, with sleepless nights and constant fear. Internet restrictions deepened isolation, as people struggled for information and safety. Both societies rallied in solidarity, but unity was fragile under the strain of casualties and disruption. Volunteers in Israel delivered aid to the displaced, while in Iran, nationalist sentiment surged, at least temporarily. The conflict exposed the vulnerability of ordinary people, who bore the brunt of leaders' decisions. In both nations, the illusion of security was shattered, replaced by fear and uncertainty. Civilians became the true casualties, their lives upended by a war they did not choose. The direct missile exchange marked a turning point in Middle Eastern history. Decades of shadow war erupted into open conflict, setting a dangerous precedent for future confrontations. The escalation exposed the limits of diplomacy and the fragility of international peace. Israel's strikes on Iran's nuclear program crossed a red line, risking a regional nuclear arms race. The world's efforts to contain the crisis were overshadowed by the reality of war on the ground. The conflict showed how quickly tensions can spiral, with devastating consequences for civilians and global stability. De-escalation now demands immense political will and unified diplomacy. Without it, the region risks descending into a wider, catastrophic conflict with global repercussions.